Welcome! In this video, we're going to talk about conversions, or at least our awareness for our sternum. As you can tell, we have a light out, so we're actually going to switch to that wall over yonder, but I do like to kind of show off our decals because they're really nice and I like them. So, over yonder, what do I mean by conversion? Right, so obviously converting meaning you're turning one thing into another, ideally without losing anything, so you're converting it completely, right? So when you talk about converting from like imperial to metric, you're not going to try to lose like whatever measurement you're trying to measure. You're going to try to keep it one-to-one. But anyway, that's a little bit of a more nerdy thing. What I mean by that is actually going to be converting or translating our energy from our core and below into an actual sword movement, right? This is in fact a sword channel, right? So that's kind of key, right? And the sternum is a really good place to focus on that sort of thing. In addition to the front of the sternum, I want you to also be aware of the deep shoulder blade muscles, right? I'm sure they actually have a name. I should actually Google them because I reference them quite a lot, right? But these two aspects, I'm not going to touch my chest because I'm trying not to hit the mic, the front of the sternum as well as in the shoulder blade, that's really going to be where we're easily as well as effectively going to translate whatever energy we pump into them into a sword movement. So a quick aspect I want you to be aware of in terms of the sternum is actually our pectorals, right? So I don't know if this is a hot take or if it's just something that people agree with, I just was not privy to. You actually don't use your pectorals that much when you swing a sword. Do you use them? Of course, right? Because it's going to be doing some sort of maybe finer tuned movement. However, by and large, I want you to be aware of when your pectorals are being excessively activated. In general, right? I want you to have a very relaxed chest, right? So you might be wondering where you actually generate a lot of that power. That's going to be coming from the shoulder blades, right? That's really what's going to be pushing the sword up into a position as well as dragging it down into a powerful cut. Again, will the pectorals be used? Yes, but the main focus I want you to have is going to be on our shoulder blades. Mildly related to this, right, is in addition to the pectorals being relatively relaxed, I definitely want you to have a relaxed shoulder, so top of the shoulder. So I became aware of my somewhat weird anatomy in that my shoulders, this is naturally just how tall my shoulders are, to the point that some of my sword instructors like, okay, you need to relax, and they try to like push my shoulders down. This is just naturally where they are, right? So in general, if you do see someone like your student or even yourself shrugging up a little bit, especially if they're coming from it from a boxing perspective, be aware, right? So you want those to be relaxed, right? So when we're boxing, we're trying to use the raised shoulders actually cover your throat and your jaw and all that fun stuff. In theory, when you're sword fighting, you're going to be using armor to do that instead. So you actually want to be completely relaxed on the top of the shoulder, pretty relaxed in the pectoral. Something that I've talked about quite a lot in the past is using our deep shoulder to actually do the stuff, right? Do the cuts, right? So when we talk about cutting, right? So I don't want you to think about using your pectorals. I'm trying to think how you would do it. You kind of pull the sword up and then cut again. I want you to, again, think about activating, again, deep in the shoulder, pushing forward, up into a cut. Noticing we can activate our core, right? So we can also think about our belt knot and all that fun stuff, bringing it up. And as we use our deep shoulder to really drag it forward and cut. That's the general idea, right? Noticing that, again, the pectoral is not doing that much for it. However, I just want you to be aware of that interesting dichotomy of a very relaxed front, but a relatively tense back. But that idea is about converting a linear motion of our deep shoulders into a linear motion of our sword, right? It's also going to be using the linear motion, again, of our hips, of our core, all of this pushing up into a cut in order for it to be, again, a linear motion down with a center cut. However, as you can imagine, so unlike aspects of kendo, for example, where they really like the men strike, although Salyomen is also angles, but we want angles as well. So especially if you use a longsword in Hema with a crossguard that will nail you right in the forehead if you're not careful, we like working on angles, as well as in Gumdo, we like to work on angles. So me personally, I like working on angles as well, because many reasons, right? So an angular cut is kind of like the happy medium of, again, that angular momentum, angular velocity, which are two different things, right? Of our shoulders, right? Adding our horizontal vector to our cuts on top of the linear motion of our core. So a diagonal cut is actually probably one of our most powerful cuts, which is good because it also has a wider range of attack. So as opposed to a center cut, where it's really like sniping things, a diagonal cut is good for doing a lot of damage against a wider range of a target. So a classic example, right? So let's just assume a long-ish stance like this. Again, it could be like a front stance in Taekwondo, a long stance in Gumdo, or just the longer stance that's very also common in Hema. Let's just do a diagonal cut, only doing our linear motion, right? So if I try to do that, it's okay. It'll cut, right? If I'm facing you, obviously there's still going to be some angular momentum, right? But right, not terrible, right? However, the greatness of that diagonal is also going to be accentuated with our use of the shoulders, right? So this is now translating or converting that angular movement into a linear movement of the sword, right? So when we prepare, if you want to over-exaggerate when you're beginning, aim with your opposite shoulder. So with, in this case, if we're cutting over our right shoulder, leading with the left hand forward, noticing I'm actually almost like showing you my back. And when I actually want to cut, again, using the deep shoulders as opposed to just the pectorals, pushing out into that cut and using the shoulders to actually switch, have a full range of motion for that cut, right? So facing you. So instead of just being up here and cutting this way, think about bringing that shoulder back. Again, now activating more of my glute actually. And again, dragging it forward, switching, there we go, the shoulders so that we have a little bit more of a range of a cut. So this has a few different things. So yes, it is translating this shoulder motion, giving a little more oomph to a cut, right? In addition, this also gives me a smaller target, right? As if I'm here and cutting, I'm kind of facing you, have a little bit more, to be hit by, versus here, it's a lot smaller, right? Which is nice if you're facing like a spearman, for example, someone using a spear, or an archer, which, let's be honest, like if you're up against an archer and you're using a sword and they're in range, probably the archer is going to win, right? But using and being aware of, again, where that sternum is and where it's shifting from one side to the other is going to be quite critical when you think about, again, using the twisting of your shoulders. Again, not your shoulders in the sense of top shoulder, but the switching of the shoulder to get a little bit more power in our cuts. And the last idea I want to play with is more in line with more modern open hand martial arts, as opposed to us fighting with a sword, right? And that's going to be the idea of proper posture. So if you have proper posture when you're fighting with a sword, that's obviously good, right? So we've already talked about posture in the sense of, again, our root and working all the way up. So we have a really good, solid foundation from which to strike, right? So for open hand is a little bit more obvious when we use our sternum, right? So I'm going to do just a classic inner form block from the ITF version of Taekwondo, right? Where we have our fun little prep. And the idea is I'm kind of opening up this way. Noticing that I'm actually going to be pushing my sternum a little bit more to activate the back muscles to reinforce the block, right? So can this be used to block a round kick? Sure. The way I like to actually personally think about these forms a lot more is this is actually really good on just posture in general, right? So when you're here and just kind of like slouch and just kind of here, you're going to get blown through with a round kick anyway, versus if you're up here, again, really sinking into a more structured stance and position, that's going to open up your chest a lot more. It's going to give you a lot more mobility. It's going to feel good as well. So when you go through an open hand form like that, it should also feel pretty good, right? So that's, yay, right? But you can also incorporate that stuff into swordsmanship as well. It just gets a little bit weird because we don't necessarily do a lot of equal and opposite. So for example, like this is really good because my right side is pushing back, my sternum is pushing forward, my left is also pushing back. Doing the same thing with a sword is just not what we do, right? This is as far as I can think, right? But that is another aspect I want you to think about in terms of your sternum, is just proper posture. Right, so at least for me, I don't know what has done it, probably the years of working at an office, but I've kind of like crumpled in a little bit this way. So whenever I do actually open up my chest, I don't know if the microphone can sometimes pick it up, but it sometimes like pops and cracks a little bit, which is probably not good, right? But it feels good after it pops, right? So sternum, thinking about posture as well. But as with anything in this series, I want you to be aware of, yes, the sternum, but also work your way up, right? So having the best sternum posture in the world, but then your hips are like out here and doing weird things, isn't going to do anything, right? Or might do some things might be bad, right? So if you're really tensing up your pectorals, for example, and you're twisting in a weird way, it might pull something. But remember, you want to work your way up through all of these. But with that, make sure you stay safe, stay humble, and keep training.